Poptropica is an online game made of many islands. Each island consists of an elaborate fetch quest in which the player usually stops a bad guy, saves the island folk, or wins a competition. On the surface, it appears each island is its own contained universe, and you, the player, were not actually traveling to different islands on the same world. However, that may not be the truth.
In the third book of the Poptropica graphic novel, The Secret Society, it is revealed that Poptropica is a group of uncharted islands in which each is a random place and time in human history. By entering that island, you have effectively gone to that time in human history, and anything you do there will influence the rest of history.
We know we can trust the books as canon because book characters appear in Mystery of the Map. This effectively means that most of the islands can be strained into one timeline as they all take place on the same world.
But in the books, there are people who live in Poptropica itself rather than the timeline-influenced island. Some of the islands in the game would fall into this category, thus not being included in the real timeline. These include early Poptropica, Supervillain Island, Poptropicon, and Reality TV. A few islands are not going to be included in the canon at all because they are either sponsored islands, such as Big Nate, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, etc., or too meta, Poptropica.
The timeline starts off with Mythology Island as it takes place in ancient Greece, which places it further back in history than any other island. It is important to note that while Zeus does reference Poptropica as a whole, this doesn't discount Mythology Island from the timeline as Zeus is a god and therefore has godly insight.
The next island is Mystery of the Map, as it takes place in Viking time. While a few of the main characters and the main villain reference Poptropica, this is because, like us, the player, these characters operate outside of the timeline, but this island as a whole operates within the timeline.
Following Mystery of the Map is Arabian Nights. This island takes place on what we can pinpoint as sometime around the Islamic Golden Age, placing it somewhere around the 8th century.
The next island following Arabian Nights would be Astro Nights, which takes place around the 14th or 15th century. It can be assumed that after technology took their daughter away, the king and queen would have banished it, explaining why the rest of the timeline does not have super advanced technology.
Skullduggery Island is next in the timeline, with the golden age of piracy happening between 1500 to 1800. It can be assumed skullduggery takes place during this era, placing it after Astro Nights and before the next island.
It can be assumed since the Americans started moving west around the 1800s, while West Island would take place within 60 or so years, placing it next on our timeline.
Mystery Train is irrefutably set in 1893 because it takes place during the Chicago World's Fair in that year. That would place it soon after the events of Wild West Island.
The next island, taking place 19 years after Mystery Train, is SOS Island. Being based on the Titanic, it is likely the Poptropica world equivalent of this event. Seeing as the Titanic sank in 1912, it would make sense that that is when this island takes place. Survival Island was based off the short story The Most Dangerous Game, which was set sometime after World War II, so it makes sense Survival Island would also take place around this time.
At this point in the timeline, a lot of the islands start to get closer together, so we have to start taking some liberties. For example, Vampire Curse is by far the most reaching we'll be doing in this timeline. This island takes place in Russia at an unknown time. However, we can pinpoint this time using the cinema seen on the island. Russian cinema started around 1917, however, up until 1953, most Russian films were filled with Soviet propaganda. However, the cinema shown in Vampire Curse does not appear to have any Soviet propaganda, placing it after 1953 where there was less censorship. For the sake of simplicity, we're just placing Vampire Curse in 1953 exactly.
Following Vampire Curse is Monster Carnival. Early in Monster Carnival, we are shown a newspaper proclaiming Carnival returns, dated for July 25th, 1956, meaning this island takes place in 1956.
The events that transpire in Escape from Pelican Rock are directly based off of the Alcatraz prison break in 1962, meaning Pelican Rock takes place in 1962.
The next island is a fan favorite, 24 Karat. In 24 Karat, there is a movie theater showing Night of the Living Carrot and Carrots of Fire, which are direct references to Night of the Living Dead and Chariots of Fire, which came out in 1968 and 1981. So it can be assumed 24 Karat takes place near the release of either of these movies.
Ghost Story Island, we can assume, takes place before the 21st century, as there is a printing press for newspapers that people appear to read, placing it before modern technology. The player uses ghost hunting technology, which would allude to it taking place sometime in the late 20th century, but we don't quite know where, so we're just placing it here.
Shark Tooth definitively takes place in 1997 because in the museum there is a bust of Dr. Hammerhead, which marks his death as 1997, but later in the island it is revealed he is not dead but rather was stranded on a deserted island. We know he wasn't on the island for super long, so it can be assumed that his death year, aka the year he went missing, is the year this island takes place.
Shrink Ray Island is able to be pinpointed at around the early-ish 2000s. CJ has a chunky desktop computer and uses LeetSpeak for her password, which was common around the 2000s before gradually fading out of relevancy in the 2010s. This would mean Shrink Ray Island is in the 2000s.
My personal favorite island, Twisted Thicket, is based on a movie by the same name which came out in 2008, so it makes sense that this island also takes place in 2008.
Time Tangled Island also takes place in 2008, placing it almost side by side with Twisted Thicket. Time Tangled Island starts in the present, which to the game is 2008, as that was the year the island was released.
Counterfeit Island introduces the Balloon Boy, a recurring joke in Poptropica, implying he floated off the island and thus is out of the timeline, but that's a theory for another day. The point is, the Balloon Boy is a reference to the Balloon Boy hoax of 2009, meaning Counterfeit Island takes place in 2009.
Backlot Island is next in the timeline, and we know this because there are posters parodying The Hobbit and Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, which are both films that came out in 2012, placing Backlot in 2012.
Zomberry clearly takes place very close to the present, so we're just going to place it at its release year, which was 2013.
Nightwatch Island has no clear year, however it has several references to Zomberry Island, which would place it after Zomberry Island, but before the more futuristic islands that we're about to get into.
Mission Atlantis has to take place in the near future because the film director gives us a submarine that can make it all the way to the ocean floor, which implies that these kind of subs are readily available.
Lunar Colony Island is next up in our timeline, taking place at around 2028. On the island, the space agency responsible for the lunar base is PACE, based off NASA. NASA has stated they plan to have settled the moon by 2028, placing it here in the timeline. And swiftly following Lunar Colony is Cryptids Island. In the video for the Jersey Devil shown in Cryptids Island, it states the Jersey Devil was born 300 years ago. The Jersey Devil was allegedly born in 1735, which would place Cryptids Island in the year 2035.
The next island in the timeline is Virus Hunter, taking place about 30 to 40 years after Shrink Ray Island, which would have given plenty of time for the Shrink Ray device we see in that island to have evolved into the advanced Shrink Ray device we see in Virus Hunter.
Spy Island features a slew of advanced technology, which would place it in the future, but not too far in the future. However, it can be safely placed here as the technology seen in Spy Island has not been seen in any other islands before.
The next island is Superpower Island, in which we are given handcuffs that render the superpowered villains absolutely useless. These handcuffs have to be advanced enough to draw radiation straight out of the body, something that won't come for 50, maybe even 70 years.
Game Show Island takes place a while after Superpower Island, as it takes place in a robotic dystopia where human technology advanced so much that it overtook everything. And although there are some humans that remain, their future is even more bleak.
The final island on our list is Steamworks. After the overthrow of the robots, humans and robots began to live in peace again. That is, until the plants we see somehow showed up, likely covering the entire world and sealing all the humans away in cocoon-esque prisons.
And with that, we conclude our Poptropica timeline. Obviously, this isn't the canon timeline, but it's our best guess at what it is. It's highly unlikely that the devs will ever confirm a canon timeline, as they can't even confirm when the old islands will be coming back.
If you have any theories of your own, please leave them in the comments, and if we missed anything, let us know, and hopefully we can use that to make our timeline more accurate.
And as a final note, please go play some Poptropica so that the team knows there's still people who love this game and who want old islands back and maybe even new ones.